right. Hello. Welcome everyone to Live at Epiphan. It is Thursday at 3 o'clock, and welcome to today's show. I am one of the hosts, George, and joining me today, returning for the first time in a long time, is Dan. So,
Hey,
welcome,
George.
Dan.
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
I am doing very well. Yeah, this is
Excited to
fun.
be here. The last
Yeah,
time we did this was our 2020 predictions episode, which I don't know if any of those predictions are correct anymore. I don't think we could have predicted this year. But,
No, I don't think 2020 could have been predicted by anyone. It's been an interesting,
Yeah,
interesting year.
no kidding.
And funny enough, what's happened globally that no one really predicted has totally changed all those technology predictions as well, because some things have accelerated and some things have deemed not important. And so, but one of the things that definitely has not changed is today's topic, and that is networking 101 for live streaming. This can be a big topic, but we're going to try to go through the basics today, because this is something we encounter here at Epiphan with our customers all the time. And especially now, where everyone's trying to get into live streaming and figure out how to do live events that normally they would do in person, adapting to this new normal, if you will. And they're kind of experiencing networking stuff for the first time. And surprise, it's not that easy all the time.
Yeah, it's it's a broad topic, but when you get down to the nuts and bolts, there's some basics that if you can get right, you're setting yourself up for success. So
Absolutely. So
just seeing here in chat, we have a bunch of people. Maybe we'll just quickly say hello. I see we got Theater Maker from Dublin. How you doing? Someone's here from India. Someone from the Caribbean, island of Dominica. Nice.
Nice.
Chile, New Jersey. So thanks everybody for being here.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's great. Nice diverse audience today, which is really cool. It's always fun to see. If anybody is a new viewer of Live at Epiphan, make sure to say hi in the chat. And we do this every week, every Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We're here talking about something that relates to live streaming in some kind of a way. And for those of you not familiar with Epiphan, as a company, we make hardware devices that can help you get the best out of your live streaming situations. And so we will be touching on some of those products a little later towards the end of the show today, as we build through what do we need to consider when we're looking at networking in the context of live streaming. So we've kind of broken this down into 4 sections. A little bit of an agenda, if you will. The first one we're going to talk about is bandwidth. We want to see what kind of bandwidth are we talking about. After that, we'll kind of compare wireless and wired connections and pros and cons of those. We'll look at network security, which again, as more and more people are getting into live streaming, there's things to consider there. And then also streaming protocols. Not all streaming things are the same. And so we'll take a look at some of that stuff a little bit.
Cool. So should we kick things off with bandwidth? Let's talk about bandwidth.
Bandwidth. Yeah, bandwidth, this is maybe, it's number 1 in this list for a reason, I think. So bandwidth, this is a tricky one because obviously your bandwidth is going to be different for everybody geographically, service connection wise. So why don't we so Dan, you and I, although we live not that far apart from each other, the service levels available in those areas are quite different. So what's the best you could get in your home?
Well, I'm very fortunate here is that I'm in a newer development. So when they put in, our house is only a couple years old, and we were fortunate enough to get fiber directly into our house. And in fact, I think the highest service level you can get at this building is 1.5 gigabit. Which is just incredible. It's definitely the best internet connection I've ever had. Now, I don't need the 1.5, but I did go with the 1 gigabit connection. And let me tell you, it's pretty awesome. I'm downloading and uploading super fast. It's been a reliable connection, and I pretty much don't have to think about bandwidth limitations at all, which is great. Now, of course, you pay for that. My connection costs about $100 a month. But for us, being, people who enjoy making videos and doing live streaming and whatnot, it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to compare, like my folks, they live only a few blocks away, and in their neighborhood, being an older development neighborhood, they can only get like a 5 down, 1 up connection, and that's the best that they can do. So it's, you know, you're really what your neighborhood and your local ISP makes a big difference of what's available to you.
Well, exactly. And that's maybe the best contrast there is that your home has essentially best case scenario. That's absolute best case scenario. There's many businesses that can't even get lines as fast as what you have access to versus your parents. You know, that again, my parents live out in the country and only have satellite connections, and it's far, far worse than even that. I'm somewhere in the middle. They recently ran fiber in my neighborhood. I could get gigabit if I wanted to, but I don't want to pay for it, and I have what I need. But you also mentioned the biggest thing there, upload. That's the critical part of bandwidth when we're talking about live streaming. Your download doesn't matter. And unfortunately, internet providers advertise their packages with the highest number. And the highest number is typically download because most of the time, for most DSL, cable connections, those kind of things, it's not synchronous, it's asynchronous. The upload speed is usually a fraction of what the download speed is. So to give you an example, it's fairly common where I am that you might have a 300 meg download connection over cable, but your upload is only 15 meg. And that's a massive difference in between them. So we need to know what our upload speed is. That's all that matters when it comes to live streaming is how much we can send out. And that's the opposite of when we're talking about, you know, watching Netflix. That's download. So there's understanding what we actually need and upload's what we need. So
Definitely.
as general guidelines, we can take a look at, you know, what kind of content we want to put out there, at what resolution we want to put it out there in. And of course, the standards there are going to be things like, you know, 720 is HD or 1080 is full HD. These are going to require different bit rates, different rates of compression in order to make them look good without going completely ridiculous on our bandwidth needs. So general rule of thumb is that if we want to do really high quality full HD 1080p, we're probably going to be at a bit rate of somewhere around 5 megabit, which means our upload speed needs to be more than that. And we want to calculate for some headroom. We want to make sure there's room for some variation. Bandwidth always goes in peaks and valleys.
Yeah, you don't want to be right up against your limit because if
Exactly.
you have a minor variation in that quality of service, you don't want your stream to go down or have frame drops or, you know, compression artifacts or what have you.
Exactly. So as a general rule of thumb, you know, when you kind of do the math on it, our math that we like to say is take your bit rate, multiply it by 1.5 or maybe even by 2, and that's the minimum upload speed you need to accomplish that type of stream. So sometimes that feels like you're working backwards because a lot of people will ask the question, I have 15 megabit up, how much can I stream? And, you know, you can get to that by looking at it.
Well, you should be able to do an HD, a pretty solid HD stream at
Exactly.
15 up, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I do. I can easily stream at 1080p at 30 frames per second with a bit rate of 5 megabit, and I'm not even occupying 50% of my total upload. And that's a perfect world, really.
Yeah.
So if we kind of look at that, what do you need upload speed for full HD 1080p? 8 plus megabit on your upload. That's what you need. If you don't have that, let's say you only have 5 megabit upload, that means you probably need to scale down your expectations a little bit and scale down your resolution to something more like 720 at a bit rate of 2.5, 3 megabit to fit within your ceiling of 5. If we go even deeper, your parents are a great example. They have 1 megabit upload. Sorry to say it, but your parents are not going to be streaming.
No, not at any kind of resolution anyways. Maybe at a postage stamp size resolution if they're lucky.
Exactly. You would have to scale down into the standard definition stuff at really low bit rates of like 500K, which is just going to look terrible. No one wants to watch that. No. So, and we've encountered that a lot with some of our customers. of course, through all this pandemic stuff, we've seen the needs for churches to live stream increase dramatically. And one of the things they'll often struggle with is many churches either didn't previously have good internet connections, or they're small rural churches out in the country who barely have an internet connection at all. I know my parents' local church doesn't even really have power, let alone internet. So, these are things you have to think about and say, well, if I have a 1 meg upload or less than a meg upload, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're just not going to be live streaming over that connection. And you might want to look at maybe using a cellular 4G connection instead of a hardline ISP.
Which unfortunately can be quite expensive.
It can be, because depending on where you live, you might have bandwidth caps and data caps and all this other nonsense. Especially if you're Canadian, you're going to get you're going to run into those caps real quick. So
I got a question for you, George. You mentioned something earlier, and that was satellite internet.
Yes.
And I've been hearing more and more about Starlink and things Elon Musk is doing to get better quality internet to some of these rural locations.
Yeah.
But is that going to work for live streaming in the future? Does satellite have latency issues? What can we expect this to help people connect in the future?
It does. And, satellite's almost its own topic to unpack. But in general, traditional satellite through the Viasat system, which is the kind of standard ones that are out there these days, that most people share the same satellites, and there's internet providers that resell the access. Those satellites have very bad upload speeds, like awful upload speeds, usually below 1 megabit. Their latency is also extremely high. Like, we're talking over a second latency oftentimes, because what's happening is you're sending a signal up to the satellite and it's coming back down to a ground station, tying into the landline of internet on the ground somewhere else. That latency of up and down is really long. So that makes it bad. And it also means that you're subject to huge amounts of packet loss and all kinds of other things. Starlink, which Elon Musk has been pushing, is extremely promising in the sense that the satellites are completely different. They're low orbit instead of high orbit, so that reduces the latency and improves the speed. He's also planning on literally blanketing the sky with them so that you can switch between different satellites dynamically to improve those speeds. Early tests suggest that people are getting 10 plus upload speeds.
Oh wow, that's not bad.
So there's a great potential for the future with those connections for those people in rural areas. I'm certainly looking forward to that kind of thing. But it still probably will never get them above full HD.
Yeah. We also have a question here from Kim Sorensen, who's asking, do we have any experience streaming with 5G? And obviously we're hearing a lot about 5G, and I know that you and I have talked about this in the past, and we were expecting it maybe faster than it's been rolling out. But how promising is that?
It's a yes and a no. Funny enough, there's still a lot to be seen with 5G. 5G as a technology, honestly, not too dissimilar from the concept with Starlink, is smaller stations, but more of them because of the power that they use and the wavelengths that they use, which means your city might have 5G, but the coverage area is very isolated unless they deploy a huge number of stations.
Yeah. So, and I've heard that, 5G, it's, less, you have to have better line of sight almost to the tower. So this is not, we can't expect 5G to be spanning large rural areas or going up mountains or,
No, and not unless they put a 5G station on the top of the mountain. It's not going to reach there. There are some great potentials there. Again, in a perfect world, you're in a coverage zone. Maybe they put a 5G station on the telephone pole outside your house, which is possible with 5G, which is the cool part about it. Then you could get absolutely amazing speeds and extremely low latency, which is one of the biggest things of 5G through that. But we'll have to see. So here in Canada, just yesterday, one of the major internet providers, and who also happens to be the number one cell provider in the country, just announced that they're rolling out 5G to 50 towns and cities across Canada.
Wow.
But that's going to take a while. And then you even have to have something that can connect over 5G, which There's what, like 3 phones on the market that are 5G. So it's
So we're still a ways away before this
We are.
becomes practical for your average live streamer out there.
absolutely, and I think that the majority of, we kind of said off the top, priorities have changed due to the pandemic, and cellular priority is actually one that's decreased because everyone's at home. So they're not going anywhere. They need better hard connections in their home for the internet, and they don't care about cell speeds anymore, or at least not the way they did a year ago. So a year ago, we would have said 5G is going to, do all these amazing things. I don't see that happening now. At least the adoption rate has slowed down dramatically. So we'll see. But kind of coming back around to things a little bit, some people often ask, because let's face it, if you went to buy a TV today, you're going to buy a 4K TV because they're so cheap now, and basically they're all 4K above 40 inches. But 4K is not that easy when it comes to live streaming, and mostly due to bandwidth. So while we were
four
talking,
times as many pixels than 1080p. So
right, which
is
means
it fair to say you need 4 times the upload bandwidth to be able to
Yes.
handle it?
Yes, or yeah, exactly. Pretty much exactly that. So plus, there's not a lot of live streaming platforms that do 4K. YouTube is one of the few that does, and their recommended bit rates for 4K streaming is somewhere between 13 and 34 megabits for the bit rate.
My goodness.
And then you're talking about your headroom after that. So, I mean, this is a lot. Sometimes the middle ground is actually 1440p, which is kind of a weird one. A lot of people aren't familiar with that. But what it allows you to do is send a super high quality signal to your live streaming platform, and then they'll transcode it down to the viewers to things like 1080 and 720. But it's always best to start big and go and scale down, and you never want to scale up. So a lot of game streamers actually will stream in 1440 to YouTube and allow YouTube to do that scaling to 1080 and 720.
Get a
to
higher
viewers.
quality 1080 experience
Exactly.
for their viewers.
Exactly, because you're starting with a higher bit rate. But again, at 1440, you need to look at those bit rates and that bandwidth requirements, but it's still way less than 4K. So it's realistic for even someone like you or me to know how to have no problem doing 1440 with a decent connection. You don't have to have the best.
So, quick question for you here, George, and I know we want to probably move through the topics a little
Yeah.
bit here. We probably need to segue soon into wired wireless, but I just have a quick question. If you're kind of like on the borderline of your speed between like, okay, 720, maybe you've got like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 6.5 megabit up. Are you
Yeah.
better off trying to use that to push 1080p, or would it be better to compress a higher quality 720p signal?
In my opinion, it would be better to have a higher bitrate 720. Let's be honest, the majority of people, and there are statistics to back this up, but the majority of people are consuming live streams on these little devices. No one can tell the difference between 1080 and 720 on this. They just can't, especially not on a live stream. So I would say part of that question is who's your audience and how are they consuming the content? And also, what type of content is it? And if your content is primarily consumed by mobile viewers, and if you need maybe higher frame rates, like game streamers want 60 FPS, you're going to be better off doing a lower resolution at higher frame rates and higher bit rates than you are trying to push your resolution up and keep your bit rates low. If your content is pretty static, not much changes, it's mostly PowerPoint slides, honestly, kind of like the content we're doing for this show right now, we could probably do 1080 at a lower bit rate and get away with it. So it really depends. There's a number of variables there and a number of factors, but those are definitely things to consider. Who your audience is, how they consume it, and
What type of content. Yeah. Something like
Absolutely.
sports with lots of fast moving, you're going to want higher frame rates. You're going to need more bandwidth to compress all of that action.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So,
And I guess a quick note on that, I mentioned frame rates. Most of those bit rates I was talking about were for 30 frames per second. If you stream at 60 frames per second, you have to double all of it. So it that's another factor as well.
cool.
So
All right, well, let's carry on here. I know we had the
yeah,
slide up for a minute there. We got kind of tied up on the first topic, but this is
yeah,
one that comes up all the time, and it's wired versus wireless. And I'm sure, George, when you talk to some of Epiphan's customers, this is something that comes up all the time for you. So maybe you could
it
kind of give
does.
us the brief overview here.
Yeah, many times a day. Luckily, it's an easy one to solve. Use wired. All right, done. I mean that is basically what it boils down to. Wireless is a cool technology, and we've all become very used to it. It's super convenient. I'm sorry, but it sucks for live streaming.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons for that. The technology is prone to interference. It's prone to bigger swings in bandwidth due to that interference. Brick walls stop it. Like there's a lot of things
Well, even
that
I've had instances where someone turns on the microwave, and now all of a sudden my Wi-Fi
exactly.
goes down.
Exactly. And the other thing to consider is that even if your internet provider is giving you 15 megabit upload speed, you're not going to get all of that once it's done through wireless, most likely. You're going to suffer some loss there. And you could overcome those losses, but the cost to do it at enterprise class Wi Fi is so high. Just go to Amazon and buy a $20 Ethernet cable and solve all your problems that way. There are some other ways to do it. If running a 100-foot Ethernet cable is not practical, look at other methods like power line adapters. If you live in a home or your office or facility has newer electrical wiring in it, power line adapters that basically plug into an outlet on one end and another one on the other end and basically translate Ethernet over the wiring in your building can be really great options, actually. I have some experience with this. My experience is actually negative. I live in an older home with really bad wiring. Power line adapters are bad for me. So I would not go that route. But some of my colleagues live in newer, and I'm sure in your house, Dan, in a newer build, it would be just as fast as running a long Ethernet cable.
Yeah.
So
Well, I asked them to put Ethernet into the
Well, yes.
all the rooms of the house when we moved in, but
So
I
there-
still
there's the
find
pro
myself
tip.
searching for a connection sometimes. So actually, what I did do for my basement is got one of those really long Ethernet cables off of Amazon. I think it was 100-foot cable for like $30, and it's thin. Like I was able to tuck it in and hide it. I could probably, stick it under the baseboard and run it along the floor, and you'd never know it was there. So
exactly.
it's easier than you think sometimes to get that really long cable where you need it.
Absolutely. So yeah, the pro tip there is coming back to one of our episodes before where we were talking about office space and said just buy a house with enough rooms to have dedicated office space. This is a follow-up pro tip: buy a house and tell them to wire it for Ethernet. That's the consumer advice from Epiphan. But no, all jokes aside, though, that is going to be your ideal scenario. A wired connection is always going to be more stable and is always going to be faster. Wireless technologies are getting better. They're pushing the boundaries, but they're just too susceptible to interference and loss and all kinds of things. And on top of that, if you're using a home Wi-Fi router, they have limited numbers of concurrent hosts that can be connected at the same time. And you might run into that before you know it, because they also have a total throughput that they can run. And if you have a dozen people in an office trying to do something off of Wi-Fi and they're all using high bandwidth, you might run out of that throughput very, very quickly. Ethernet doesn't have this problem. You get a really good Ethernet switch and you run cables to everyone, and you're not going to run into that problem. So,
I mean, that's a good, and I think that brings up a good point, George, is it's like when you're making these considerations about your bandwidth, about your connectivity, you need to consider if there's other users on your network as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you go and do a test and you're like, okay, I get a solid, like in your case, George, you said you get 15 up, but then maybe your wife starts uploading all the photos off of her phone
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you take a big hit, or there's other activity on your network, you need to sort of consider that and maybe even partition off parts of your network for that reliable stream connection as well.
Absolutely. So another big thing to consider is, of course, network security, which is another place where wireless is not good. Um, it is not that difficult to crack Wi-Fi networks if you really want to. Um, Security is, of course, very important. Maybe not so much in your home, but at an enterprise business level, security is super important. So that's another consideration you want to look at. Of course, there's multiple sides to security, like there is with everything. There's the actual physical network access in your premise, and then there's also securing your content from hijacks or interception once it leaves your facility online. So these are kind of two different ways to look at security, and there's a few different ways of tackling this. Of course, I think a lot of people through the pandemic, early on, became aware of all the things that Zoom ran into in terms of security with Zoom bombing and all that other kind of stuff. That's an example of why you need to be conscious of security when it comes to live streaming, and that all boils down to your network. So, accessing your AV gear, your streaming gear into your network, and understanding what protocols matter, what protocols are maybe even mandated if you're doing it within your office. If you're in a corporation and enterprise, chances are your IT staff have mandates on network security. Understanding what those are, what they mean, and whether or not you're even allowed to plug that thing in or not.
In many cases, the answer to that is no. Like, you need to check with your IT department first.
Absolutely.
And pro tip, if you work at a big company, before you go plugging anything into the network at the office, talk to your IT service department, because
Absolutely.
They will notice when you plug a new device or a new streaming appliance in, and if you haven't cleared it with them first, you're not going to be in their good books.
Yeah, you're going to get chopped pretty quickly if they didn't okay it first. One of the ways we could do that is when we're selecting gear, make sure we're selecting gear that's going to be IT friendly, that they understand, and is not a surprise, and is going to give them what they want to see from a security standpoint. So some devices will, have protocols, which we'll mention in a second, that are going to announce themselves as being trusted devices or ask for authorization and authenticate on the network and all these other things, but are also going to be easy to deploy, so that you don't have to get so many people involved. There's a lot of things to look at there, but again, try to be friends with the IT department and not the enemy, because at the end of the day, they have the control. So, Securing your content, looking for devices like we were kind of just mentioning, look for things that have high-level security protocols like 802.1x, which is a network-based security authentication protocol. This is something that's becoming extremely common at large enterprises as a mandate. If it doesn't authenticate over this protocol, you can't plug it in, period. That's becoming a big deal. So look for devices that have that. By the way, Epiphan Pearl devices do support 802.1x. Also, look for devices that support secure encrypted streaming protocols. And there's a number of those, and we're going to touch on those in a second. But once the data leaves your facility, your live stream goes out, you don't want people to be able to intercept or hijack that. So we want to make sure, whenever possible, that those live streams are being sent out over an encrypted connection. And we'll look at some of the ways that can be done here in a second. So those are, again, things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I could see that being important, especially at larger corporations that do perhaps their town halls or their internal meetings, live streaming to their global offices for what have you. There can be some sensitive information in there, and you need to make sure that stream is secure.
Absolutely. If it's your quarterly all hands update, maybe with financial updates, but as a private company, that's not public information. You don't want that to get out. You need to make sure, since people aren't gathering in boardrooms to do those kind of calls anymore, make sure it's secure. So streaming protocols, as we just talked about, can play a big role here. SRT is a newer one, and in the past month or so, we here at Epiphan have talked a lot about SRT. So if you're really, really curious about SRT, go back and check out some of our previous shows and webinars where we've really taken a deep dive into it. But first of all, I would start with apologizing to all the hackers that are trying to intercept the streams from Dan and I right now. But we're using SRT. It's not going to work.
I love SRT. Can I just say, like, this is really cool. This is, I think, only my second time streaming SRT, and I'm streaming it to our Epiphan studio where it's being switched by another Pearl. But I have a Pearl here on my desk streaming it, and it was so easy to set up, and it kind of just worked. And I must say, like, the quality that I see from these feeds is fantastic. So really excited about this new protocol.
I mean, it should look good considering all that bandwidth you have. You can just crank up the bitrate and stream it whatever you want. But in general, SRT is a protocol that's basically just a container for your live stream, and you can pretty much put whatever you want into it. So it could be 1080, it could be 4K, it could be whatever bitrate you want. It doesn't matter. It's going to be contained within SRT. SRT stands for Secure Reliable Transport. It's designed to be a low latency, firewall friendly, and secure encrypted contribution connection. So as Dan mentioned, both of us have Pearls in our homes. We could do it without a Pearl. You could do it with software as well. But you could send SRT somewhere else, have it ingested and redistributed or added into the production mix like we're doing now. It's really great at a lot of these things. It's designed to really overcome a lot of these barriers and really improve the feeds. And it was, it's almost built for 2020, if you will. So this has been great to use, but it's not the only option. There are other options out there. Some of the other options are things like HLS and MPEG-Dash. These are kind of two newer protocols that we're starting to see pop up quite a bit. They kind of replace the older and aging RTMP protocol, although RTMP is not gone yet. And if you are going to go with RTMP, try to use RTMP-S, which is the encrypted secure version of RTMP, which is required by Facebook Live, by the way. So even Facebook, not exactly known for caring about security, but even Facebook uses encrypted streaming with RTMP-S. But with HLS and Dash, these are kind of similar to SRT in the sense that they're trying to solve some of the problems that these older protocols were not good at. One of the best ways they can do that is that a CDN, a content delivery network, a streaming platform, they're often delivering the viewer the stream over something like HLS, which is a protocol that Apple invented. So if you can send them HLS and then they're redistributing it in HLS, it's cheaper and easier to deploy for that content delivery server. So basically there's less transcoding going on, more throughput, so it's a lot easier. So that's going to become a big deal. Dash is essentially the same idea, but it's an open source thing instead of an Apple protocol. So you can pick your battles there, I suppose. But both of these have things designed to make them easier to play with firewalls and proxies, which RTMP is not really very good at. So again, things to keep in mind, and we will definitely start seeing more and more platforms adapt to these newer protocols. And different ones will use different protocols going forward for sure.
A question for you, George, and this is coming up in chat as well with Scott. Maybe this is related to firewalls, which you just mentioned, but ports, making sure your ports are open, making sure you can get through that firewall. Any considerations that we should be making? I know this is probably a broad topic, but
it is. Generally speaking, for live streaming, again, because we're typically talking about outbound traffic, we're sending it out somewhere. And this is one of the reasons why you use a CDN or a streaming platform, because self-hosting this type of stuff is impractical, because that means your bandwidth has to be even larger. But it also means people would have to get in through your firewall. That's not a good idea from a security perspective. Luckily, when we're publishing streams, whether it's with RTMP or SRT or HLS or Dash, when we're pushing these out from our encoder to a platform like a Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Wowza, whoever, we only need an outbound port to be open in most cases. So we do need to look at what ports are being used. RTMP typically uses port 1935. Some encoders, you can change that. So as long as port 1935 is not blocked on the outbound, you shouldn't run into a problem. However, at larger enterprises or in certain venues like hotels, you might find they have completely blocked those ports, just to have more control and to restrict certain activity. So again, it comes into, where are you? What are you trying to do with it? SRT is certainly a little bit better at that, in the sense that you can set an SRT port to literally be whatever you want. So if you want to choose a really bizarre port that isn't used for any other kind of traffic, super high in the port range, you just configure SRT to do that, and that's it. So you get a lot more flexibility there. And then SRT also has has different modes. Caller listener, which is exactly what it sounds like. One calls, the other listens. But it also has a mode called rendezvous, where they meet in the middle. And rendezvous is extremely good for firewall issues, because instead of one end having to have something open to ingest stuff, they just meet in the middle and figure it out. So it's much, much more firewall friendly than some of the old stuff is. So even if you're doing a site to site, like what we're doing right now, both Dan and I are going into our studio, we don't have to have anything open in the studio to risk a vulnerability there, because we're using SRT and configuring it properly. So
Fantastic.
I hope that answers that question a little bit.
I think it does. Yeah, that helps. I mean, typically, you're going to have to go into your router settings, your firewall settings, to kind of check up on some of these port things.
Yeah.
But,
And again, most home routers and firewalls by default don't block any outgoing ports, and that's okay. Your highest risk of being hacked or something like that is inbound. As long as your firewall is preventing inbound traffic, you're okay, for the most part. If you're trying to restrict certain users inside your network from doing certain things, that's where you would start blocking outbound ports. And again, that does happen with a lot of larger enterprises. They may not want you to be live streaming, and they'll intentionally block certain things. And that may be something they implemented 20 years ago, but of course it may not be valid anymore, and we need those IT guys' help to make sure to change that.
So once again, stay friends with your IT department if you're in a corporate setting.
Exactly. So IT-friendly hardware, good segue there, is one of the big things that can help us there. And for us here at Epiphan, when we're talking about IT-friendly hardware, we're going to plug ourselves, and this won't even be a shameless plug. I'm just going to straight up do it. But the Epiphan Pearl 2 and Pearl Mini, we do think is very IT friendly, in the sense that there's a lot of control that they can have over it. It has the built-in support for these security protocols like 802.1x and HTTPS for the web browser interfaces. You can use things like SRT. All of this is built into it as one device. It can be joined as part of your domain if you're in an enterprise, so that it can be managed that way. There's a bunch of things packed into them that make them very IT friendly. Beyond that, of course, for those of you who may not know, our Pearl systems are also designed to be a standalone all-in-one production system. They have kind of a ton of versatility and reliability and ease of use packed into these super easy to use boxes. So instead of having a rack full of gear, you could have just one Pearl to make your life a lot easier. If you're in a position where you really need to look at live streaming and you want to really step up the game, make it super high quality, take advantage of fantastic bandwidth you're able to get your hands on, hopefully. Even if you have the best bandwidth in the world, if you're trying to live stream with your phone, it's still going to look ugly. So get a good camera, get a good encoder, and then you're going to be at the top. They all kind of work hand in hand together. Same time, if you don't have the decent enough bandwidth, a Perl's not going to save you either. So it's kind of all these different components to, build the bigger puzzle, I guess.
I like the one point on this slide as well, which is like the third point on Perl system. In terms of getting your IT department on board, ease of use. If you hand them a box that's complicated and going to take them a week just to figure out how to turn it on, probably not going to be very receptive to your initiative. Whereas if it's something easy to use with good documentation, a great support department like Epiphan has, you're a lot more likely to get buy-in from your IT department.
Absolutely. So that pretty much covers our topic today. So I'm definitely interested to see if there are anyone in the chat has any questions about some of the things we've covered. I know we've addressed some of them, but if anyone has any questions about this topic and about networking with live streaming, throw it at us. We're here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we've already answered a couple. This is an off topic, but Kim was asking, hey, when's the new Perl coming out? This year, maybe? So, Kim, thanks for, obviously you're familiar with Perl. George, any hints we can give on the Perl roadmap?
I mean, I guess not really. I can really just say stay tuned. We're working on some stuff that hopefully will be later this year.
The Perl story has a bright future, I suspect.
Yes. Whether that means it'll be exactly what you're looking for, Kim, I don't know yet. Let's see. But definitely stay tuned. And of course, Kim, you're here quite often watching live at Epiphan, so you will hear it here first. I can guarantee that. So just stay tuned for that, and we'll let you know when we have more information to share with you for sure.
Cool. Well, that was a great topic, George. We covered a lot of ground, and I learned some things from you today. So thanks a lot for going through all of that. And this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and of course, as always, everyone, make sure to follow, like, subscribe. Again, we're here every Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern doing shows just like this. We've also been doing a ton of webinars, basically since the beginning of March. And a lot of those are much longer form than this and cover different topics. If you want to learn all about how to configure a Perl for some of the things we covered today, we have webinars for that. You want to learn more about SRT, we got some webinars for that.
Where's the best place to find past webinars, George?
Best place is to go to our website, epiphan.com. There's a link up at the top for webinars, but it takes you to epiphan.com/webinars. We do post them after the fact, VOD, so the whole back catalog is there. We typically do a webinar every Wednesday at about 2 o'clock Eastern, give or take, unless schedules change that. But that's usually when we do them live, which means if we have one upcoming, which are all listed on the website as well, if there's a topic there that you're really interested in, register for that webinar. You can join us live when we do it, ask questions in chat and everything like that to really dive deep. So look forward to seeing you on those ones.
Awesome. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up there, but this has been great, George. Great to see you, and this was fun doing the live show. So
perfect. Thanks so much, Dan, and welcome back to Live at Epiphan.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.